In the last tutorial, I created a new QGIS project and I downloaded 2 shapefiles that I saved in the same folder as my project. In this tutorial, I'll add those shapefiles to my project and begin to explore them. First, I'm going to open the Data Source Manager tool, which will allow me to add many different types of data to my project. The icon looks like 3 different colored squares stacked on top of each other with a small plus sign. I can also access the same tool in the Layers menu, the Data Source Manager, by searching for it in the Help window. Or by pressing Command L on my Mac, which would be Control L on a PC. On the left-hand side menu, I'm going to select Vector if it's not selected already. The shapefiles I'm importing are of vector type, which means that they're either points, lines, or polygons. The alternative would be raster data, which is made up of pixels. And in this class, we're going to be working with vector data. So the first layer I'm going to import here is the borough boundaries, which is a polygon vector shapefile. To navigate to my shapefile, I'm going to click the button to the right of where it says vector data sets. It can be a little hard to see, especially if your QGIS is set to dark mode like mine is, but it looks like 3 little dots. Once you click that button, navigate to your shapefile and select it. Your Data Source Manager window sometimes might hide behind your QGIS project, so you're going to need to find that window. This can happen a lot in QGIS with all the various different pop-up windows that happen. So if you're expecting something to appear and you don't see it, try moving around your windows in order to check kind of behind this QGIS project window, the main window. So after I put in the location of the borough boundary shapefile that I want to add to my map, I'm going to click the Add button, and then I will close the Data Source Manager. So another way to do this is to drag the file into where it says vector datasets here, just from your window. So I could also do this here by dragging the file right into where it says vector datasets. It would do the same thing. And a third way to do this is to simply drag the shapefile into my project. So in this case, that works great. Occasionally, it doesn't work as well. For example, later on, we're going to be adding non-spatial CSV files and spatial CSV files. And sometimes dragging it directly into the window can mean that QGIS doesn't really know how to read the data types. And so that can cause problems later. But in this case, it should work fine to just drag the shapefile directly into our project window. I'm also going to drag in our second layer that we're using here, which is New York City subways. And then you'll see that we have both the borough boundaries as polygons, and then we have these points for representing New York City subway stations. So I can look through the properties of these layers by double clicking them in the layer window. I can also get to the same place by right-clicking here and then selecting properties. So there's a lot of information that's contained here, and a lot of it, or most of it, won't make sense until we get a little further along. But one place we can look now is at the fields window, which is going to show us the different variables or columns that's contained within this data set. There are ways to change the data types if you need to. You can see the data types right here in type and type name, and we're going to get to that later on. Let's look in more detail at the data that these layers contain. We can use something called the attribute table to explore the data contained in our subway stations layer. So to do that, I'm going to click the icon up here that looks like a little table or spreadsheet. I can also access it by right-clicking on my layer in the layers window and then clicking Open Attribute Table. So that's going to open up something that looks more like a spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel. You can see our rows and our columns. In this case, every row represents an individual feature or shape on our map. And I can see that because if I select one of these rows and then I move my attribute table, I'm going to see that one of the features on the map is showing up in yellow, which means that it's selected. I can see this even more clearly if I select multiple rows, and then on my map, multiple features are going to display in yellow. In this case, the yellow is a little bit close to the orange symbols that came up to represent my stations, but the yellow means that they are selected. I'm now going to deselect these rows using the deselect all features from layer button that's at the top of the attribute table. It looks like a yellow rectangle with a little cancel sign. Later on, I'm going to show you how to filter and select rows based on individual attributes, so based on the data that's contained in these columns. So that will come later on. In the attribute table, we can see that there is an object ID, which is our unique identifier for all of our features in this layer. You have the station name, you have a URL linking to a website, you have the lines that run through that station, and then you have notes, which I can see more of if I drag the column and make it wider, notes on which lines run through the station at which times. Now I'm going to close the attribute table and I'm going to examine the data in another way. I'm going to use something called the Identify Features tool, which looks like a blue circle with an eye inside of it and a pointer on top. I'm going to click this and then I will click individual features in my layer. So once I click, a new window comes up on the left-hand side. This window is called Identify Results, and it's going to show me the same data, but for that individual layer. So I have the object ID, name, URL, line, and notes. I can explore the features of the other layer or layers that I have in my project by going back to the layers window here, selecting a different layer that I want to explore with Identify Features. And then if I click even in the same place, instead, the layer that I've selected in the layers window is going to be identified, and it's going to show me instead this larger polygon, in this case, Queens. And that's two ways to explore the data that your spatial layers contain.